Hello, my name is Yusuf. Welcome to another video around configuring and deploying your Lakehouse environment. Before we start, as a recap, we first discussed how to set up Unity Catalog, then we talked about configuring scheme to synchronize groups and users from your AD. Today, we'll cover how to leverage Terraform to deploy your Lakehouse platform, and I have with me Yassine who will guide us through.
Awesome. Thank you, Yusuf. Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell me more about the newly introduced Databricks Terraform modules.
Awesome. So yeah, what I want to share just before we start is just to go through the Databricks Terraform provider. Like if you go to the documentation, you will see all the different resources that are covered with the provider. A couple of things that I want to highlight, some things that I really like about the work done by the team at Databricks is first, we have these guides. So if you are interested, for instance, in deploying your Databricks workspaces environment on any cloud provider, you can just go through these guides and it will help you step by step on these deployments. So regarding the models, what the team did is, if I actually search for Databricks examples, so as you can see, it's a set of, I think, plus 30 models and examples on how to actually configure and deploy your Lakehouse environments on Azure, AWS, and GCP. And the goal is to help customers and help everyone using the Terraform provider to accelerate their deployments and build some reusable models that can be used for different use cases and also for different environments. So if we have a look at this, for instance, you can see the different models that we have today. For private link on Azure, you have something on AWS as well, and also on GCP. So you have the models, but you also have some examples on how to use these models. So you have two options. You can either just call the model and use them, or you can start with an example to see how it works.
Very interesting.
And of course, you can still configure your model if you want to actually add newer components, new resources to your model. Now, if I go, as you can see, it's covered with this repository, Terraform Databricks examples. If you go to this repository, I can just scroll down and I will see the content of these models. So you can see all the examples that we have on Azure and also all the examples for AWS, GCP. If I scroll down a little bit further, we have the same thing for the models, not only the examples. And one last thing to highlight is you have these models that can be used in your environment to configure and deploy your environments, but you also want to actually also automate your Terraform deployments. So you would see some examples for CI/CD pipelines with a step-by-step guide on how to configure your pipeline. So if I go to Azure DevOps, for instance, I can scroll down and you can see the workflow end-to-end and also a step-by-step on how to configure this.
And can you walk us through how to configure a module to interact with a cloud environment?
Okay, that's actually a great question to start with. So if I go back to my repository, to answer your question, it depends on which cloud provider you're using and which Terraform provider you're using. So in our case, we will be working with two Terraform providers. You have Azure and also Databricks. To answer your question, the goal is to go to the Terraform registry and you would go to for instance, if it's Azure, I will search for Azure. And you can go to documentation and the first page of the provider, you can see a step-by-step guide on how to configure this. Same thing for Databricks. So if we search for Databricks, I will do the same thing. We'll go to documentation and I can see an example usage, how to use the provider. But what we're looking for is the authentication. So in authentication, it will give you the different options to actually configure the provider. So it can be path tokens or service principal using Azure CLI. It depends on your requirements and your actual setup.
Okay. And can you show us the different available modules and examples?
Yeah, so as I said before, you can see all the models and examples either directly in the repository, or you can go to Terraform registry, search for the model, and then you can see these examples. But just to give you a quick overview, if I come here, like you have on Azure Databricks Lakehouse, same thing on AWS, you have some models on Unity Catalog, on Private Link, and so on.
Okay, that's super cool, but let's go to the hottest topic. So in my previous video, I did show people how to configure Unity Catalog. Can you show us the example about how to do it using Terraform?
Awesome. So yeah, just before we start, like anyone watching the video, I suppose they followed along with your previous videos on how to configure Unity Catalog and also how to sync users from their identity provider, either Azure AD or Okta or another identity provider, to the account console. Now we will use all this information to actually use Terraform and automate the whole process. For instance, I want to deploy some catalogs. I want to create first my metastore, define catalogs, schemas, and tables, assign permissions, and so on. So to do that, we have two things, as I mentioned before. So you can either use the example. In our case, it's ADB Lakehouse that we will use in our demo, or you can scroll down and look for the actual models that does the work, that do the work. So for instance, if I'm interested in Unity Catalog, I can go for Azure Databricks Lakehouse Unity Catalog, and you can have a look at how to use it. So in our example, as I mentioned, we will use this. You actually have two options. You can go to the example directly, and as you can see, you have like a guide on what it will deploy, how to use it. Or I can also, if I go back and go to registry, I can look for ADB Lakehouse. And this is actually very useful because you have the README of the repo that describes everything that it does. Also, you have all the inputs that you have for your Terraform code, the actual outputs, and also the dependency if it's using another provider. And as you can see, it's using Azure provider. Now, what I can do is, if I want to start using this from scratch, I can clone the repository in my local environment and start using the example directly. So this is what we will do. We'll take the Azure Databricks Lakehouse example, and we will see how to use it to deploy our resources. Okay, so if I switch to my VS Code, you can see that I already cloned the repository. I already have everything available for our demo. And in examples, I can go to Azure Databricks Lakehouse. First thing you need to do is define the variables needed by the model. So if you go to variables, you will see all the variables needed. And what you need to do is create a TF-vars file and give a value for each variable, unless if it's optional. So I already did this. I defined my TF-vars file. Second thing you need to do is configure the Azure provider, the authentication for the Azure provider, and also the authentication for the Databricks provider. And this is what we covered in your previous question, Yusuf.
Okay.
So once I do this, in the main file, you can see all the models that it's actually calling. So it's calling the first model, which is ADB Lakehouse. This one will create a new Databricks workspace and also a new meta store for Unity Catalog. So it will create the workspace, the meta store, and attach the meta store to the workspace. Next, we have ADB Lakehouse UC Metastore. This will create some all the resources needed for the Metastore, and also configure the owner or the admins for the Metastore. So, for example, if you already configured your scheme to bring users from Azure AD, you can take a group of users and assign them as admins of the Metastore. And the next one is we'll define the service principals and groups that we want to add to the account console or to the workspace. And the last one, as you might guess, is actually defining the resources within the Metastore. So, for example, our storage credential, external location, catalogs, schemas, and tables.
Yeah, it's much easier than defining everything using the UI.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually super helpful because first, I can use this in different use cases, different environments, and also I can use this at scale. If I want to make any change, it's easier to just add the change to your code and apply it to all the infrastructure. And it's also very useful to actually apply some best practices and enforce these best practices, for example, the naming convention, the type of resources to use, and so on. All right, so in my case, I already ran Terraform init, Terraform apply, because it takes some time to actually make the change. What I will do, I will go to my environments. First thing, if we go back to the example, ADB Lakehouse, and you can scroll all the way down. At this level, you can see the steps that I just mentioned. So first, change the specify values for each variable in this new file. Second, configure the remote backend if you need. For example, in a storage credential, storage account on Azure. And then you can run Terraform init, maybe a Terraform plan just to list all the changes that will happen. And then you can run Terraform apply. All right. So if we go to the account console, I can go to workspace, and you can see that I already deployed a new workspace called TF demo. And at the same time, if we go to data, you can see that I already configured a new Metastore. And the Metastore is already attached. If I go to the Metastore, it's already attached to the workspace that we just created. So basically with this model, we deploy the workspace, a Metastore, and attach the Metastore to the workspace. And at the same time, if I go to my workspace and go to the Data Explorer on the left, you can see that I deployed a new catalog called Bronze Catalog Dev, a new schema, and a new table in this schema. Same thing we did for the storage credential and the external location. And at the same time, if I go to my Azure portal, I can see all the resources that were deployed. So like, if you want to make any changes now, for instance, if I go back to this level and go to variables, you can see, for instance, we have tags. If we want to do something like chargeback and we want to tag all our resources, using Terraform, you can just go again to the TF vars file. You specify new tags, for example, the name of the environment, the name of the use case, the name of the team, and then you run Terraform apply, and it will apply all the changes to all your resources if you are using the tags.
And since you're mentioning this, can you, for example, add a comment to an external location just using by using Terraform?
Yeah, so you can definitely do this. Yeah, this is like a simple example on how to use Terraform. You can also suppose that you have a new admin that just joined the team. You can add them to the group of admins, and it will automatically assign them to the Metastore admins. And to answer your question, what I can do, I can either define this, if I go to main, I can make the change directly at this level to add the comments to the resource that I'm interested in. Or what I can also do is, since I'm using a model and I want this to be applied to all my resources, I will go to the model that I'm using, which is data assets. And in UC data assets, you can see that we have Databricks external location. So in Databricks external location, we have an attribute called comments, and I can easily change this. Let's call it just created by Terraform, just to show you that the change will be propagated to the workspace. First, we will go to the account console, to the workspace. And if I go to my external location, as you can see, I created an external location for the landing zone. And the comment is created by Terraform. So this is only one external location, one workspace. If you have many to deploy with Terraform, it will be easier to scale. Now, if I go back and I save these changes, and I will run Terraform apply. So let me search for apply. All right, so if I close this, so with Terraform apply, it will show you the changes that will be made to your environment. And in my case, I use auto approve. I wanted to just go ahead and deploy the changes. But normally, if you don't specify this, it will tell you the changes, and then you can confirm and apply these changes to your environment. So while this is running, I just want to show you one other thing. If I go to the Databricks provider, since we are talking about Unity Catalog, I can search for Unity Catalog, and you can see all the resources that can be managed by Unity Catalog. So for instance, as I mentioned before, you want to apply some permissions on your data assets to your users, groups, and so on. You can go to Databricks grants, and I will scroll down just to show you an example on how to do this. So on the right, you can see which Unity Catalog objects you're concerned with. Either it's a schema, table, view, or catalog, or other assets. Suppose we are interested in catalogs, we want to manage permissions on catalogs. So as you can see, super straightforward. I define the name of the group or the users and the permissions that I want to give them on this catalog. And this will be scaled and applied to all the catalogs if you want. You can actually iterate on all the catalogs and give these permissions if you want. All right, let's have a look to see if
it will spare you a long time, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So as you can see, we changed only one thing. We didn't create any resource. We didn't destroy any resource. All it did, it updated the external location with the new comments. Now what we can do is, again, go back to the workspace, and you can see that the comment changed automatically. This is only for the comments. You can do the same thing on the owner, the credential itself, the storage credential itself, and all the other assets or objects in the workspace.
That's pretty useful. And what if, I don't know, tomorrow I want to contribute or maybe report an issue? What are the steps that I need to follow?
Oh, awesome. Thank you for asking that. So if I go back to the repository, it's actually a great question because like this is efforts from the team at Databricks to create new content on or new models and examples on Terraform, but anyone can contribute and create new content. So for instance, if you have some examples on how to deploy like Databricks workflows or any use case with Terraform on Databricks, either on GCP, Azure, or even on AWS, you can create a new pull request. Like you can fork the project to your Git, add your content, and then create a new pull request to add your content to the repository. And once you add the content, you can include it in the README. For instance, you added some examples on Azure. You can specify the examples and just a description to explain what you did. And if there are any issues, you can do the same thing. You can go to issues and just report this issue or directly create a pull request to solve the issue.
Okay, and one more question. This is my very first time with Terraform. Can you point me the resource that I need to check in order to be, let's say, a Terraform expert?
Awesome. So yeah, I can see that you're being confused with what I was saying. So if you are new to Terraform, you want to learn how to use Terraform, there are a couple of resources, very useful resources and trainings. I think my favorite is the resources provided by HashiCorp. And there's actually a study guide to prepare for the Terraform certification. And it will provide you with all the useful resources for Terraform. Like step-by-step guide on how to use Terraform, what are the best practices on around using Terraform and so on. Once you cover all this content, you can actually, if you are interested, you can pass the Terraform certification.
Okay, that's super cool. Any other thing to add to our viewers before we close the video?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Once you deploy all these resources, you can play around, add new resources to your Terraform code just to try it out. And if you have any interesting examples, feel free to create a pull request and add them to the repository.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yassine. So I'll take all the links you did share with me, and I'll add them in the description of the video. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Yassine in the comments. We will make sure to answer all your questions. Thank you, Yassine,
Awesome.
for your time.
Thanks, Yusuf. Thank you.
Bye-bye.